Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all, and a special welcome to our guest, our celebrated guest, Professor Gayatri Spivak, and our celebrity host, Professor Sarojini Nada. So this might sound like a strange place to be having a seminar, and I've been asked this afternoon, what on earth is UTEL? Well, UTEL is what you want it to be. But it started out as a project as part of our broader curriculum transformation, reconstruction. And the intention is to generate e-learning materials, but in a professional environment. The idea was initiated last year when we had infinite student disruptions and loss of lecture time. And we vowed never to allow a situation where students were denied the opportunity to learn because they were unable to access a university classroom. So the UTEL project, which UTEL stands for UKZN Technology Enhanced Learning, is to generate materials professionally designed and developed based on sound teaching pedagogies, which will become available not just to UKZN but to the broader academic community, and soon you will be receiving invitations to come to the studio to generate your materials. So this is our first attempt at a professional recording of a seminar. We will start with a conversation with Gayatri Spivak, which will be hosted by Sarojini. Thereafter, Sarojini will have a second session with the editors of the book, Disrupting Higher Education, a curriculum, and we'll then have a panel of participants, of contributors rather, to the book. In between, we will have musical interludes by our own Professor Chats Devrup, Head of Music at UKZN, and other select events which Sarojini will announce as we go along. We hope that in the course of the different panels, you will use the opportunity to engage with the participants and with Prof. Spivak. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the celebration and launch of the book, Disrupting Higher Education Curriculum, Undoing Cognitive Damage. We are very pleased, I think, to be guests of the University Teaching and Learning Office here at the University of Kwazulu-Natal, and in these new studios, which were largely inspired by UTLO TV, which was launched, I think, in 2014, Rabi? Yeah, in 2014. So UTLO TV is an initiative which aims to expand and enhance academic discourse through more accessible talk show-like conversations, which Gayatri was just telling me she's highly allergic to. She'll tell us a little bit more about that. But the emphasis is on conversation, on discussion, and we hope that the cameras and the studio, as difficult as it might be, would be more incidental to the conversation rather than integral to it. And so my name is Sarojini Nada, as you heard Rabi say, and I used to be at the University of Kwazulu-Natal. I currently hold the Desmond Tutu Research Chair at the University of the Western Cape. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to, I think, what promises to be a feast of scholarly engagements this afternoon. Beginning with this conversation with Professor Gayatri Spivak, who needs little introduction, but I think I shall try to do some justice to that. So I'm going to read from our flyer. Professor Gayatri Spivak is an Indian intellectual activist and founder of the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society at Columbia University. She is deeply involved in feminism across the spectrum. She trains teachers and guides ecological agriculture in West Bengal, India. In 2012, she was awarded the 8th Annual Kyoto Prize in Arts and Philosophy in the field of thought, and Ethics. And in 2013, she was awarded the Padma Bhushan, which is one of the highest civilian honors in India. I think some of us sitting here who didn't get to see Gayatri in 2014 might still be feeling a bit starstruck, but welcome Gayatri. And she's going to share some of her thoughts on curriculum transformation in higher education in Asia and Africa, calling us, I think, to a reality check. And then we'll open up to our studio audience for conversation. And the idea is to have conversation. So, Gayatri, welcome.
There we go. Thank you. Conversation now. Okay, so it's a conversation turning together, right? That's what we hope to be achieving. But I speak also to the distant audience because they will be also overhearing something and they will also share it with the folks here. I'm always very aware of the actual situation so that this doesn't look like a conversation between you and me, because it ain't a conversation between her and me. It's a much bigger dancing together, which is why one has to think about the generating of e-learning in e-learning materials very, very seriously, because many years ago I translated a book by Jacques Derrida, more than 40 years ago now. Began in 67, so that's well more than 40 years ago. And the entire first section, which I had not understood that well at that point, I was 25 years old when I began, so I had really no sense of the tremendous thing I was reading. It was about the fact that although we had entered the digital universe, the way in which this universe was being dealt with across the board was in a solid pre-digital fashion. And you know, this was at that time, 1967, it was before his time. I mean, he really was sounding a warning that has come home to us now. And it does seem to me that what I read in, I believe it was Craig Blewett who wrote this, that e-learning is not storage and transfer of content through online channels. That's a fantastic place to begin. It is not the storage and transfer of content through online channels. And when we talk about curriculum, quite often we think, don't we, that it is all about content. And I think that's where my own challenge starts. I'm 75 years old and I've taught now full-time at a university for 52 years. So therefore, it's very hard for us who began in a completely different mode to be able to move so that we can enter this new way, and even when the younger ones are kind to us, even try to help a little, because we must learn from our mistakes. Now, I was going to go on from this with another word that I learned from our book, the book we wrote together that's being launched. I didn't know this word before, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Skeuomorphism, correct? Good, thank you. So this word, which I'm not going to explain, on the 23rd of June, I gave a talk in Calcutta. Anybody understand Bengali here? No. I gave a talk in Calcutta in Bengali on Ganotantrir Rahasya, which actually would be translated the mystery of democracy, but I took the Rousseauian phrase and I called it the paradox of democracy. And believe me, my entire talk was about the fact that democracy was skeuomorphically used in today's world. Of course, it wasn't a lecture in English, so I couldn't have used this word anyway. But nonetheless, when I write about this in English, I will now use this word. So to an extent, this is how I was going to begin about curriculum, because my question always is, for whom? Cui bono? For whom? This is where the reality check was coming in. And I have, by reducing and reducing and reducing and reducing, come to the terrible conclusion for everyone, A, but B, for the largest sectors of the electorate, which are not at universities in Africa and Asia, because they're the ones who bring in terrible governments, because democracy at that stage is just body count. And I feel just body count, it's arithmetic, it's not anything other than that. So therefore, even clean elections, which is in itself somewhat difficult to imagine. So therefore, that's where I begin. For whom are we proposing any kind of project? And I was going to go on from there, and I'm now going to come to my end, but it is also my absolute conviction that practice norms theory, and what we teach is theorizing rather than applying theory. And so therefore, this work of curricular change is persistent, because theory must learn from its mistakes constantly. It's not something that you actually monumentalize in books. There again, the digital is very, very useful to us. And so, because it is not the era of the book anymore. And so therefore, I was going to talk about that, practice norming theory. Norm is a word that was first thought through by Foucault's teacher, Canguilhem. And Canguilhem, quite correctly, himself having genuinely suffered as a Jew during the Second World War, quite correctly said that norming is polemical, you have to fight for it. Foucault, who was in a different position, I believe, made a mistake and changed polemical to political. It was more useful for him. But so therefore, I would have gone from there, but that very fact, that practice norms theory, makes me mention two things. I don't want to be sensational, but I think it tells me something about for whom. And this is why, Margaret, I asked you what year was that conference where I first met you? In Johannesburg it was, right? 1991, right? New Nation Writers Conference. And what I really hold is what you said, nothing has changed. I'm talking about what I read, what I saw this morning, that video in Pretoria, the KFC. Nothing has changed. And so therefore, when we talk about for whom is the curriculum being changed, we have to think of something awful like that. And it was a KFC, right? I was remembering also a man I met only once, Nindendra Swami, who's now dead. In Bangalore, I met him in the 80s. And he had gone to jail, old guy, because he had sabotaged a KFC in Bangalore, because the KFC at that point was financing private prisons in the United States. And so to an extent, this whole thing that we now have a single political system, and within that we have the essentializing of nationalist racism both ways, that is also a huge problem about what is called decolonizing the curriculum. There too we have to think. And another thing, and with this I end, because I believe that the everyday norms theory, and I'm engaged in work about which I will be happy to talk during the conversation, in creating a database multi-portal for development workers with the unsystematized mother tongues of Africa, because those are used in many other ways for campaigning by parliamentarians in order to keep promoting ethnic violence. So when I heard last night about the violence in Sudan, I immediately, I'm an ignorant person, I'm a British literature, French and German comparative literature PhD, right? So I have to find knowledge even at this stage of the game. I'm an ignorant person. I have to use online resources to see to understand problems. The moment I heard this piece of information and I saw the incredible violence, I went to my Google and I asked, how about unsystematized mother tongues in the Sudan? ? And what I got, of all the things, I chose the most scholarly thing: technical findings of Maoist principles, practice and planning of multilingual education workshop, covering states of Central, Eastern and Western Equatoria. Workshop location, Maridi, Western Equatoria. Report by staff team, and names and emails of all the participants who are probably like us. They are class continuous with us. We can talk to them. And their priorities are academic priorities. They've done the best job. But there's a break between R&D, policy, and real research. The table of contents is all I'm going to show you. I'm not even going to read. Here's the table of contents. You can see how careful it is. And I'm certainly going to look at it. And they're talking about ethnic groups and languages used, etc., sociolinguistic analysis of each state, etc., etc., draft of teacher training modules, etc., knowledge management. Remember, we'd been talking about it last time. So one of the ways in which we can let practice norm theory is by understanding that we actually live within a single political system cross-hatched by essentialist ethnic nationalisms. And I promise this is the last thing. This is an old book that I had read before. Rereading, I see many things that I had not understood. Here is my friend Etienne Balibar writing about the fact that today technological transformations assign educational inequalities and intellectual hierarchies an increasingly important role in the class struggle, and I would say also gender struggle, within the perspective of a generalized technopolitical selection of individuals, you and me, in the era of nation enterprises. This was written long ago. It's an old book, Race, Nation, Class, Balibar and Wallerstein. In the era of nation enterprises, the true, quote, mass era, unquote, is perhaps upon us, and we are not equal to it, because we keep to, I was commenting on the fact that when it is like this, our priorities are, is the show going to look good? When it is this thing, our priorities are the research standards good enough? When it is the Human Development Index, the priorities of the index makers are their statistical principles clean and good? This is not bad, but we somehow have to, it's wonderful that we think about this, but we have to think about the fact that all of these things are only halfway houses, somehow ignorant as we are of how to build bridges. That's where the persistent work of curricular change comes in. So I come back to the question, to the generalization with which I started. Cui bono? For whom is this good? And e-learning is not equal to storage and transfer of content through online channels. Thanks a lot for letting me sound off. And now let's start.
Thank you, Gayatri, for challenging us to think more carefully about curriculum transformation and what that might look like. Drawing on your 52 years of teaching, that's phenomenal.
Can you imagine that?
Gosh.
Tenure track assistant professor in fall of 1965.
Sure. Okay, so you've been in the business long enough.
Yes.
But just to pick up then on some of the discussion, asking us to think more carefully through e-learning, perhaps through what it means to use channels like this to promote learning. The idea that curriculum is not about content, and that all-important question, for whom? The politics of knowledge production, right? And the knowledge management in particular. I'd like to hear a little bit more, perhaps, and perhaps the audience.
Ethics of. Carry
the
on.
ethics of
Yes.
the ethics of
Ethics of knowledge, whatever.
knowledge production,
Not just politics.
not just politics of knowledge production, and I think the topic that will be hot for all of us here is the idea of decolonizing the curriculum, right? What does that involve? So I'm going to open up actually to the audience for questions, comments, points of engagement with Gayatri. Can I just ask our technical folk, we have mics, or people can just speak? You can speak. You can put up your hand and I will see you. I can't.
There we
Michael,
go.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I wanted to extend the metaphor you used of a halfway house for all of the methodology, strategy, operations that we're actually engaging with as academic researchers. Will we ever reach the full house? Or is this a continual journey of always seeing ourselves as halfway? Are there any ethical standards that are going to take us to the full way?
I don't believe we will ever reach the full house, and I think that is a good thing. See, we have to change our own way of thinking more into a women and servants way of thinking. You keep the place going rather than the master's way of thinking, which is you write a book or you something that people can look at later. So to an extent, I mean, this is the way we live, isn't it? Our life, after all, is we are not going to be immortal. On the other hand, as we move, we try to do the very best that we can. I call this the double bind of life, every act of life and thought. We must work as if we will reach the full house, but we must also work as if we will not. This is a difficult thing, but believe me, Michael, I say this to even people who are much less institutionally educated than you and me, and real activists. And I'll give this example. In the summertime, I think it was, I spoke to the 72 new members of the Tagore Society for Rural Development in India, okay, in West Bengal. It's not connected with Rabindranath Tagore, it's just somebody who liked him, gave that name. It's a People's Alliance, it's a non-government organization long before NGOs were thought of. It's a wonderful outfit, and its head, Tushar Kanjilal, asked me at one day's notice, Gayatri, you're here, you got to talk to the 72 new ones. And this is how, and again in Bengali, of course, this is what I began with, that you must think that you are going to be successful, but you must also know that you're not going to be successful. So that, and that's also with the future anterior. Something will have happened which does not resemble what you and I plan today, but something will have happened. Therefore, I would say no, but that's a good answer, and that is that's how we have to change our mindsets so that we work with that kind of understanding, as if it will, but no, it won't.
A woman's work is never done.
Never done.
Never
Also
done.
servants. We forget servants.
Yeah. Other questions, comments, points of engagement? The idea was just to give a start. I can see Maheshwari turning in her seat.
I was wondering.
I was waiting.
As a follow-up, I feel like I'm an agnostic, and maybe it's going to sound like heresy. I don't know if curriculum change will make any difference. Forgive me for saying it amongst an audience like this. And I think maybe that's, to me, it's not such a problem. I like that uncertainty. So it seems similar to what you were responding to. I have a problem with certainty. Uncertainty has more possibility of both succeeding and failing, or neither. but sometimes I am scared to say it because it's an audience that doesn't like to hear it. It's the same with decolonization and everything that goes along with it. I don't know. But out of that not knowing is not inertia. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it comes in the moment. So it's not a question, it's just to sort of add to what was said just now.
I will take it as a question, Maheshwari, but tell me a little bit about yourself so I know to whom I'm speaking.
Well,
I know Michael, see, so I didn't have to ask him that. So carry
I
on.
teach anthropology. My background was in comparative religion, Indian philosophy, in thoughts, ideas. Brought up Hindu, agnostic now. So I think a lot of it is about not knowing and not knowing that I shouldn't need to know. So it is the same with the teaching. I want to teach, I want to be a good teacher, but often it is I don't know whether this is going to be received as such. So the whole decolonization project to me is more confusing when it is articulated as a certainty that if we remove old scaffolds and insert new structures, things are going to automatically change. I see that as inherently problematic. But I don't want to contribute to the problem by saying I have something different or new.
This is a good place to begin my answer, and I am treating it as a question because it is indeed a question, although you spoke in declaratives. Remember, I'm a literature person, so I know how to read prose. Anyway, so I'll tell you that I do agree with your idea that by changing the curriculum, you do not necessarily bring in change. It is just, however, that there be change. It is just that there be law, but law is not justice. It's the same kind of statement that I made to Michael. I have little new to say because I'm so old. So the things that I say have lasted in the wash. I completely agree with you that unfortunately, this can give a way of stopping work by saying, gee, we've changed the curriculum, all will be well. And as you say, you know, it's a full house, curriculum changed, all will be well. Then Margaret would not have needed to remind me of that fantastic conference where, in fact, I want to take his name because he's gone, but he's so wonderful person, Louis Nkosi, a very old friend of mine. He was there then. You know, we wouldn't agree that nothing has changed. Jabulondebele, also a very old friend of mine, worked with Steve Biko. He is not a popular person because he's so counterintuitive in saying again and again that this place has not changed. So now, let's not, however, stop there because you know that you don't want to add to the problem. So therefore, let me once again, and keeping in mind that anything I say must be undone again and again. My model is that model of persistence. And in fact, if you forget everything, each generation comes with that need. We old feminists have seen how we bred post-feminists who didn't give a damn and changed the whole thing because we had done the heavy work. So to an extent, I would say that let's look at it two ways. One is that if you don't make, I think the word decolonizing is an unfortunate word, but it may be useful for the ones who are really sincere about this. I have learned to acknowledge that words do not carry meanings that are written in stone. You have to move things. So let's hang on with that word. And I would say that decolonizing is not so easy because national liberation is not a revolution. And therefore, and I say this with great conviction again, because on the 14th of August, Romila Thapar, who is arguably the best historian of ancient India and a real activist, had to go underground during the emergency. Romila Thapar, who's older than I, and I will be speaking in Calcutta to an audience who will find us very objectionable about the failure of independence, because negotiated independence brings in the fact that it's the progressive bourgeoisie that brings in independence, and the rest of the country is left cold. So to an extent, therefore, decolonizing is not so easy, and especially when it comes from a university crowd. This is why, although I'm completely in sympathy with those in the student body or perhaps even the faculty who actually want to go on with this, because it is against racism. It is basically against racism. So that is not a bad idea. But always 2 by 2, 2 by 2. For those of us who want this, it's not good, because it leads to a kind of that essentialized reverse racist nationalism. Not good, kills, and also very class fixed. So therefore, again, we have to, as we constantly look at practice norming theory and revise what we are doing, learning from our mistakes, we cannot just write it off. And I have also come through, after all, the culture wars in the United States. And I know that I would go to talk at smaller universities and even big universities, and women would, and folks of color would come to me beforehand and say, Gayatri or Professor Spivak, say something, because our dean is using what you have written about not extending the imperium of English and telling us that we don't need to put in to do any kind of revising of the canon. Say something. And from that experience, I realized that I must be aware that this has many sides. On the other hand, and this is the last sentence of this rather long answer, when I was at the University of Cape Town last year, I think, I don't know if they videoed the thing, I was very, very careful about offering a critique of Rhodes Must Fall. And the students were, the ones who were most engaged, were, I was taking a risk, because they had turned away Achille Mbembe and Judith Butler before. I was taking a risk, but I think they were very aware of my integrity. And so they actually, I heard later from Mamadou Diouf, when he came back to Columbia, Gayatri, what did you do in South Africa? Because they said Spivak really spoke to us rather than speaking from a distance. So therefore, it was hard to criticize it then and there. But therefore, I will say that keep this in mind. I'm with you, but that doesn't mean that it also, and I'm glad you brought up Hindu, because, you know, in that situation, we are, whether we like it or not, historically tied with Aryanism. And therefore, it's quite necessary, quite easy for us, quite understandable for us to be absolutely horrified with essentializing Aryanism. And I resist that as much as I can. But that's not where we're at right here. So we have to think of all of these things as we go forward, two-pronged on a level road, but very narrow, and constantly learning from our mistakes, letting practice norm our theoretical convictions, keeping it persistent rather than once and for all, and moving along. Thank you.
Thanks, Gayatri. As you were talking about responding to this idea of non-certainty, I was thinking also of Butler, and particularly her call for us to move beyond the binary, right, in terms of gender. And that made me think about what you said about the polemic. Did you say norming is polemical? And was it Derrida?
No, let me just say it once again for everybody. The idea of norming was proposed by Canguilhem, the Foucault's teacher, who was a Jew who had suffered a good deal during the Second World War and was a different kind of person from the next generation. Canguilhem was his name. And he said that the norming of theory by practice is polemical, because unless you fight, you are not going to be able, but fight as an intellectual. I mean, I'm talking about somebody who was an intellectual, who was at the Collège de France. So the fight as an intellectual, we are at a university, intellectual activism. And he, therefore, was, because remember, the ones that we are taught, I'll come back to you, don't forget what you were going to say. Those largest sectors of the electorate in Africa and Asia, they have not been given, or it's been stolen from them, because human beings can do it. They have not been given the right to intellectual labor. Millennially, we must not essentialize the pre-colonial. The pre-colonial was not a bed of roses. And to put our finger at colonialism alone is not to recognize that these structures, I'm speaking as someone who practices this in her own context, in India. That is to say, in terms of the fact that the largest sector of the electorate don't really, 1947, long time ago, most of them are illiterate landless. They don't even remember independence. They know that it's something. But they certainly do know and suffer still from the caste system. So therefore, whether we believe in caste or not, we have been historically privileged by the caste system. So to that extent, you have to give them the right to appreciate the right to intellectual labor. So I'm talking about intellectual activism, not just standing at the picket line. We are teachers. So from that point of view, he said, you must argue this polemically for the norming of theory that's happening here, you know, and Foucault changed it to political, which then allowed all the Partha Chatterjees of the world to quote norming. And you know, then he went on to the abnormal, madness and reason and so on. Good ideas, but not where Canguilhem, his teacher, was. So that's what Canguilhem. Okay.
So that was precisely the question then, the polemical versus the political. And maybe that's too stark a way to describe it, but if you think about Butler calling us to, you know, move beyond the gender binary, thinking beyond the gender binary, queering the binary, if you like. On the one hand, of course, that's the intellectual activism we need. On the other hand, we have our embodied realities as women, as people of color,
as
whatever.
let's say non-men. Okay?
As non-men.
The word
as
woman is no longer
as
that moving to me.
But what do we do with that? What do we do with those lived experiences that require the binary in order to effect change? You require the binary in order to say my experience is different from yours, right? So and that requires that political shift.
It's very nice being here because I agree with most of the stuff that's being said. Well, what do you do? I'll tell you what you do. You offer constructive criticism to Judith Butler. See, Judy, I adore her. She and I were born on the same day. As also, I mean, of course, I'm 14 years older than she, but as also the 1848 revolution, by the way. I'm 94 years younger than that one. But at any rate, so the same day. Now, the problem with Judy, and she's a wonderful, smart thinker, but she was basically trained as an analytic philosopher. Mm-hmm. And an analytic philosopher does not question the position of the philosophizing subject. That's the main problem with that. Yeah. They can do everything. She can touch everyone suffering everywhere in the world. Yeah. Hey, you know, I'm a literary critic, British literature. I always think about Glendower. You know, I mean, when the claim is made that I can call the spirits from the vasty deep, the answer is, why? So can I, and so can everyone. But when you do call, do they answer you? You see, so of course you can say, yeah, I'm giving up on binaries. But
That's
you know, the people who are really in the, I mean, the idea is not just to go to Palestinian universities. It's it is absolutely necessary to go there. It's absolutely necessary to fight against the racism of the Israelis. But the idea of thinking that the class continuity established by universities all over the world, and that enablement is the bottom line of intellectual activism, is a mistake. And one must learn from one's mistakes. It's the same kind of mistake that another colleague makes when he sees and celebrates quite correctly the Palestinians really fighting for their olive groves, and he thinks that that is an ecological move. No, sir. You don't want to think that your own epistemological machinery is what is the epistemological machinery of the whole world. You have to understand that you are as historically bound as others, and we must change. So therefore, I would say you offer a criticism to Judith Butler, who's a good person in the same struggle, but has this particular disciplinary problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Disciplining Butler, opening up for more questions and comments. I see Labby and I see Betty. Betty, you invoked Lewis and Corsi's name, and Betty was actually going to read a poem about that she wrote about Lewis and Corsi. So we're going to invite you just now, Betty. But can I take Labby first?
I just wanted to follow on Uma's.
Oh, okay. Can I take Betty? Good. Sure.
Uma's question about uncertainties prompted me to think of how we can move from uncertainty or with uncertainty to claiming the role of the imagination in all its forms, formations, and the creativity that uncertainty then allows us to journey towards.
That is, again, fantastic. Because, you know, I mean, really what I want to say is being said by folks so that I can just do a gloss. Because belief, after all, is the smallest part of, you know, ontological commitment. Yes, it is just like that. It's the smallest part of how the reason works. That's not, I mean, even top primates can do it. You know, did I tell the story of the goat here last time, or had it not happened yet? This is a very good thing. I'm sleeping outside. It's extremely hot, 52 degrees in Birhum. And since I will not sleep without a mosquito net, everybody has a mosquito net, but some of them don't care about malaria. But I'm not going to impose anything. But so my mosquito net has been tied like this to trees. I've never slept there outside, and I'm on a string cot, okay? All night, huge upheavals. What's happening? It's not a tiger. A tiger can't be that low, and it can be a snake. A snake can be that high. What's happening? So, but I can't say anything to anyone because, I mean, you know, so as it is, they're always serving me, Maheshwari, because I'm a Brahmin, right? Chakravarti. So, therefore, the last thing I will say to them is, something is happening to me. So, therefore, I'm just unable to sleep. So in the morning, I say to Lotika, Lotika, what happened? You know, there was such a, oh, sorry, it was just the small goat, it was scratching its back. Now, the thing is, the small goat, since I had never lain there, had figured out that string cot, if he jumped, would scratch his back, because it wasn't clear. See, that's the reason the top primates, in fact, have this syllogistic capability. So therefore, he taught me a lesson. Unfortunately, next season he had been eaten. But at any rate, so therefore, that's not where we're at. Where we're at is the imagination, which even when all rights to intellectual labor has been taken away by us, caste Hindus, where I work, for 5,000 years, the imagination has not been touched. The imagination, therefore, is so flexible that it can, in fact, even in psychosis, it's the imagination that becomes psychotic goes, continue this. Einbildungskraft by itself, if it's allowed to go, it will, God knows where it will go. So it seems to me that it is with the imagination that we work, flexibility, making it as flexible as possible. And so that's why I'm so crazed about knowledge management, because the imagination is made too certain. And so, yes, I completely agree with you. It's the imagination that will help us move towards others who do not resemble us. And that's democracy, the equality with people who do not resemble us. Thanks.
Thank you. Labby.
Hi, I'm Labby Ramrathan from School of Education, Michael's colleague. I think we all recognize that curriculum is a highly contested terrain, that it's highly complex, it's political and all of these things. And the idea of imagination has really come to fore in terms of how we actually begin to think more creatively and structurally about curriculum. And one of Michael Apple's central argument is that we tend to interrogate, we disrupt, we record and move on. And I think the question that I want to ask is, how do we as scholars, and to bring the ideas of imagination to what we do, how do we actually begin the process of causing a pause so that we can actually change the direction of curriculum and bring in the creativity and the imagination?
The process of what did you say? I didn't. How do we process of?
Cause a pause. So disrupt.
Cause a pause.
Cause a pause. Oh, wonderful. Cause a pause. Okay. Now, first of all, of course, for me also, it's a question. I mean, if I could really give you a solid, once and for all answer to that, then there would be no problem. That is the first. I mean, stating the problem is an important thing, isn't it, Levi? And it seems to me that we have now stated the problem. How can that be done? I'll tell you my rule of thumb way of doing it. Trying to, and this is nothing unusual, nothing unusual. In fact, lawyers do it all the time. Trying to get into the, in fact, students do it, and American has a slang for it, psyching out. Trying to psych out the teacher, trying to psych out the other. I mean, trying really to not just to think about myself, but to think about the situation, the expectation, how it will look to them, the proposal. That I think is an act of imagination. That's the first act of imagination, where I started, cui bono. And it's not just the individual, it is also the collective. On the other hand, you can't think of the collective as faceless. And this is a problem. This is a huge problem, and this will not be solved by psychology. See, psychology, starting with the openings of behaviorism, etc., is still somewhat pre-critical in its assumptions, because it cannot take into account the fact that, or it will not take into account, which is less good, the fact that where I come from is much bigger than my field. And so therefore it's that, I'm not speaking psychoanalytically here, because psychoanalysis itself is also coming out of it's a certain kind of providing the universal affective equivalent. I mean, the universal equivalent, according to Marx, is money, right? And so in the 19th, 20th centuries, universal equivalent, affective equivalent, affective value code. So I'm not going there, don't get me wrong. But somehow, in some kind of a way, this thing of individual and collective, this is a problem that will confront us. And again, just as I was saying to Michael, we should allow this to be a problem rather than solve it too quickly, because the way in which we have been trying to solve it will already help us year by year by year. This is where your remark about turning uncertainty into a place for action, see, that's a very positive answer. That's forging a strong practice to know that to acknowledge my mistake doesn't undermine me. It makes me, this is very hard for people who have not been given any power. This is, it's easy for me to say because I don't care about anything. But on the other hand, it is hard to do this one. But nonetheless, within limits, I think that's how we begin. Really by thinking, are we going to change those guys who were beating up the couple? They are all middle-class folks. They were in cars at a drive-by, right? You hear the woman saying, "What are you doing?" she says. "Continuous with us." You know, she's not using kind of language or anything. Whereas the white guy is saying, "Shoot him, shoot him." But, you know, she's saying, "What are you doing? Don't do that to me," because she feels that she has rights, etc. So, but the guys who are doing that, am I going to change them or their children by this curricular change? But I must try, because this is supposedly, and that's where I don't even know, I have to look again, the skeuomorphism of Plato comes in. You know what I mean? So therefore, is it you? You?
Correct.
See, next time I'll be able to say skeuomorphism, skewered, very good. Okay, so therefore, I would say that's where we begin, by becoming poets. That is to say, imagining the other from the inside, both. Now, one more thing. See, this is the secret of old-fashioned liberal education, European style, okay? It's also part of many cultural productions, but I'm not here to essentialize anything. So this, Gramsci, Fanon, W.E.B. Du Bois, these are the three I know. There must be many others. All three of them thought, can this be used without producing oligarchical mindset? This individual and collective. If you want to see this, you should go look at a book which you will never see, because it was published in 1795 and I don't believe it was republished. It's a rare book. I can't give you the name and the title writer right now, but I have it. You can email me. Where the guy who is for the French Revolution, okay, for the French Revolution. No wonder Marx said that the bourgeois revolution was simply to increase the power of the executive. For the French Revolution, and he says the most sacred, using the word sacred thing is the economic freedom of the individual and the collective. And therefore, to protect this is an English guy, in favor with French Revolution. To protect this is the task that we have given to ourselves. So this kind of thing, the history of liberal education, this is what three people as different and as connected as Antonio Gramsci, Frantz Fanon, and William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, the three of them actually worried about, can this be taught? Because they knew that this is what allows us to spread our wings. Can this be taught without fostering an oligarchical petty bourgeois mindset, so that we want to control and succeed and make money and tararara? So that's what I'm sharing with you, brother. It's a problem, but I think that's the first step. Imagining the other totally from what their point of view would be, because I can even say what the generalizations are in the heads of the white guys who were beating up the black couple. I can say it in such a way that if I were not sitting here, you would be convinced that I believe them. See, that to say yes to the enemy, because you know what I mean? So that's what Indians in general in the United States at least are white identified. So therefore, I can actually know this because I come from a group that can think this way. You know what I mean? So that's the thing, to go out of oneself into what seems like the other side and imagine them as their inwardness, not how you think they are, how you can change them, with the assumption that you cannot change them, and you will learn from your mistakes. Again, a very long answer, because you see, this subject relates to my life's work. I didn't feel this way when I was younger. But now that I have entered the last part of my life, I feel only this way. You know, that's why I'm answering at such length and in such a humorless way, except for that one joke that I made, because it's very serious for me now, because I may be dead tonight, who knows? All my friends are dying. No, it's true, that's the whole thing.
I think there's lots of calls in the room to reside in the space of discomfort, uncertainty, and that this can actually be a productive space. The pause might be a productive space. So thank you.
What you said is the right question. For whom are we thinking of? So if we try to separate that question, give the context of some kind, if we find it clear, the answer will be for such a heterogeneous group of people that the idea of a single curriculum for that group becomes enormously difficult and puts a huge challenge in front of any one teacher. I wonder if you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, that's the answer. That's the answer that I myself would offer also, that it's a huge problem because of heterogeneity. Now, that is in fact not just here, that is everywhere. And so, therefore, what do we do? Do we give up on general curricula? This is a very serious question. And so, you see, when Balibar wrote that perhaps technopolitical, in the era of nation enterprises, that's the here, you see, the nation enterprise, South Africa. In the era of nation enterprises, the true, quote, mass era is perhaps upon us in terms of the whole single political system, which is run by single languages also. I mean, English is, of course, the most, and one of you have written about it in our book. I would say that there are some things that should perhaps again be changed over and over again, but should be general. But I also think that given that it is online, that's how we are doing this stuff, it can be multi-portal, can it not? It seems to me that that's how the teachers can have a way of going. I mean, like, you know, this thing that I did last night when I heard about Sudan, it's now going to take me in a direction, and I would like at some point to be able to talk about that work, you know, the work of the unsystematized mother tongue. So I would say that the general curriculum we should still keep some segment of some general things. As to what they should be, I don't know. I think it would be best if they were not humanities things, because I think the humanities are there to supplement the need for generalization. And by supplement, I mean the supplement is dangerous. By supplement, I mean it's a very old idea that it first of all adds something to the generalizations, but also it really figures out the generalities well enough to know exactly what the generalities, which is why it's no use pointing fingers. You have to know the enemy well. And so so that you can do it yourself. This is this saying yes to the enemy, and not do it. So therefore, the whole is filled by the exact supplement. Therefore, it questions the totality of the generalizations required by our world, good or bad. And then comes the thing that because a supplement also takes into account the extreme complexity of individuals, not just heterogeneity, which you can kind of fill in, race, class, etc. Therefore, the supplement also brings in the incalculable. And so therefore the humanities should not be, I mean, this skeuomorphic thing of Plato, for example. I mean, what kind of society was the Platonic Socrates talking about? If you look at the Republic, mistranslated by Cicero, not for no reason, res publica is something other than politeia, which is behaving like a citizen. Who the hell behaves like a citizen across any country today? So that thing is not, it's from the first person singular of that verb. I behave like a citizen. I'm more with Aristotle, because Aristotle was not an Athenian. He was not a polites. He did not have the right to be buried in Athens. He was a stagirite, right? He was a metis. On the other hand, you can grab it, because it is Aristotle who, over the centuries, is thought of as an Athenian. So it seems to me that citizenship is also not just papers. That's another story. We'll come to that later. So in that context, when we are thinking of bringing the subaltern to citizenship, I don't think we want to give general things from the humanities, because the subaltern social groups, it's not a class, they're ungeneralizable, and they have not been made ready for what we call the humanities. So, I mean, I've even found a disciplinary problem with Judith Butler, who's very far from a subaltern. So the disciplinary problems in the humanities are tinker with the imagination. We don't want to make them general. The humanities stuff is something, on the other hand, they're also very dangerous, because they can lead to essentializing the pre-colonial, or essentializing anything that's being produced in that nation enterprise. And there we have to have the courage to be critical. And so it's a problem, but I think there must be some general things. Otherwise, given that the real bottom line is to breed the desire, to create the desire by moving the desires in the students and ourselves, to use capital for social ends. This is an absolutely unrealistic desire, so that teaching has to dehumanize here, because the human being doesn't go that way. Enlightened self-interest is the worst thing that the European Enlightenment ever said. So therefore, since that's the bottom line, therefore there has to be general things across the curriculum, but not the humanities. And within the humanities, there has to be extreme care at the control, not so much of quality, but the control of divisive, undermining, destructive, nationalist essentializing. This is how we fight the sanctioned racism of the white curriculum. But therefore, it's a question that you have asked that is once again a problem that must generate answers all the time, allowing individual situations to norm the general principles, but not giving up on the general principles. All places are heterogeneous. And I'll say one thing about Louis Nkosi, which is I saw him again and spent a whole long day with him and the poet Mina Alexander in Johannesburg, at the Johannesburg Biennale. Now, I have nothing against biennales, but I'm constantly asked also to go and talk postcolonially at biennales and so on. And if they buy me a first-class ticket, I'm very happy, because then I can go to my schools. But they have money. But Mina, Louis and I were completely bewildered and bemused by the Johannesburg Biennale, so we walked out together. And we went to the house, which used to be, I think, an electricity building or something, I can't tell you exactly what it was, which had been taken over by a mixed crowd of the poor. And they were shitting from the top down to the bottom floor, okay? And they had all these shacks and so on. And one of them, I remember to this day, where Louis, Mina, and I wanted to be photographed. There was a little shack made right there. It had a little sign that says, American Express accepted here. So that was a visit where we could really laugh out loud a great deal with these brothers and sisters who were in this building, smelling of all of that ordure, stepping out from the extraordinarily misplaced but quite fantastic, some of my friends were showing there, globality of the Biennale. So I just didn't want that not to be said before you read your poem.
So on that note, we will invite Betty. Thank you, Gayatri, so much. I think we have much more to discuss. We are going to continue with the conversation during the book launch conversation. So Gayatri will still be here with us. Betty, you're going to end for us. So yes, over to you. End the session.
I had planned to start by reading Return to My Native Land, but if there's time later in the program, I shall do that. But I think it leads nicely to read this poem I've composed for Louis Nkosi. Louis, as you know, was the exile par excellence. And even though he was literally the exile leaving South Africa, he always lived in that exilic condition, and was able, therefore, to be always living and writing against apartheid, writing against protest literature, writing against colonialism, and when he came back, writing against the post-apartheid life and society. I've drawn for this poem from his writings, and so if you will recognize them in the poem, but I do encourage you to read the writings as well. And they're from the book Writing Home, that's collected by Lindy Steeble and Michael Chapman. You watch the mating birds flying to embrace on these perennial shores, doomed between instinct and restraint in the dance of life, the dance of death. You gaze at vagabond souls forever seeking home on timeless sands, blood knot of kindred spirits, an intimate enemy. You see Black Orpheus rising from the water. You hear requiems for Sophiatown, mothers weeping, Absalom, Absalom. Black bodies, white bodies, washed in by the tide, lie in the midday sun, with flotsam and jetsam swimming in the vortex of history. Above the vault of silence, of memory, myths in the mist, the dead will arise and the sea turn incarnadine. As we walk in the night, your life along Gethsemane, your voice, your words over the brooding waters, speaks to the stone country. You render homage to masks glinting in the noonday sun. You remember the lying days, the rhythm of violence, that locusts can fly. You rail against paltry words to capture the maelstrom. You surrender to words made flesh, seared in fire. The rest is mystery. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty, and also for invoking Louis again. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back for the panel of the book launch. But before we do that, I want to introduce you to Chats, Professor Chats Devroop. Where's Chats? Chats has contributed theirs to the book in a lovely piece, actually, one of my favorites, called Sensing the Curriculum. And Chats heads up, he's the academic leader for the Performing Arts cluster at UKZN, and he's going to do some musical interludes for us, so we're going to enjoy some music and take a break. Thank you, Chats.
Professor Spivak, Professor Nada, colleagues, when Robbie had asked me to prepare a few items for this particular event, I was thinking, well, what can I actually do, that speaks to the theme? And so I decided to look at two two aspects of disruption. First, using a media system that has been quite a disruptor in the 20th century, a programmed band, a so-called band in a box. And what I decided to do was to take a piece that's quite a popular song, composed by Dusty Springfield. It's quite a pop song. It's been recorded several times. And I decided to do something different with this. Take the piece in its raw form, because pop music, as we know, emerged out of the media system that we have, and try to treat this piece in a very different kind of way, using an indigenous instrument from India, actually, bansuri. Not that I'm an expert bansuri player, it's just that I studied Western flute, and I decided to use some Western technique with this traditional instrument in trying to create something different by trying to disrupt the way music develops. Now, I know artists tend to do this all the time, so I hope this project works. I've played this piece before sometime, and this is a reworked version of the same composition.